CBSE Board, Class 11, History, Chapter 1, Part 15, audio by Renee Matthew. We saw how there emerged war between the northern and southern parts of Mesopotamia, and people were able to divide the looted things and influence and effectiveness which came about as a result of war amongst themselves. And we saw the emergence of war leaders because of power, and it is still there even today. And in those days, it's not that one particular leader remained powerful. It comes today and it goes tomorrow. That was the kind of thing that they had. And there was a time when such kind of leadership came to increase the well-being of the community. So when this kind of worship, when people saw that this kind of worship actually influenced the community and brought about the harmony of the community, the well-being of the community. What is the meaning of well-being of the community? The community started expanding. It started prospering. This was actually happening. So that also created new institutions and practices, because when naturally the city is expanding, what will happen? The practices, the ideology, the principle, everything will change. And as the time went about, in time we could see that lot of chiefs were becoming victorious, and they began to offer precious booty to the gods. That is, whatever they got, it was kept at the temple. It is like an offering that they gave, and that beautified the community's temple. So they believed that it was because of the power of their gods, the gods that they served, the temples that they made, that they got all this prosperity. And you can see all the depictions here, and about all the wars that was fought. Everything was engraved on the tablets. Okay, and this is how the warfare. You cannot compare the war with what we have today. In small scale, that is how the first war was actually fought over the river and the fertility. And there were times when the kings used to send people to fetch fine stones and metal. We saw about a king in the previous audios, and how they would beautify their temples and make it really good for the benefit of the god and community, and they will organize it in such a way that it looks very efficient. So they will organize the distribution of temple wealth in an efficient way by accounting for things that came in and went out. So when they had so many things to tell, they will give so much to the temple. When prosperity is there from a war, they will give so much to the god. Okay, so everything was actually recorded in the kind of tablets or everything which was available. We also saw that this great king Enmerkar, he had a way of showing his authority over his people because of the things that he got from other kind of lands. We saw how he got the stone, the blue colored stone from the other land. So these things were there, and that is how it showed his status, because of his ability to write, his skill to write. Okay, that is how the wealth accumulated. It gave the king high status and the authority to command the community because of the wealth that he accumulated. Okay, that is how they showed their power. And we can imagine a mutually reinforcing cycle of development. A lot of development was happening, in which the leaders actually encouraged their villagers to behave the way they liked. That is, to give so much of beauty to the temple and give so much of importance. And they wanted the villagers to always settle around them. Okay, why? What is the reason? So that they can actually raise an army. They never knew the concept of army. It is like supporters for the king. If this was the king, lot of supporters. So they always encourage the villagers to not go so far and settle, but always be together and form an army when it is needed. Besides, people would be safe living in close proximity to one another. So when you are together, when you have that togetherness, when you are settled together with one house, not far away from each other, you will be able to communicate more continuously, right? Now, the greatest problem that people are facing is the distance. We, of course, have this technological advancement which helps us to stay connected, but still, when you live together, when you have that association and fellowship, that is different. When you see the person in front of you, that is completely different. So that close proximity is something which actually shared a bond between them. Now, at Uruk, what happened? Uruk is a very important city we can see one of the earliest temple towns in Uruk, and lot of depictions of armed heroes and their victims are seen like this. They used to draw like this, inscribe like this on tablets, and Uruk is a city which showed lot of depictions like that, and lot of archaeological surveys are seen from 3000 BC when Uruk grew to be the enormous extent. So we can see from the archaeological studies that Uruk was a very small city. Then it started expanding to almost 250 hectares, twice as large as Mohenjo-daro. I hope you have heard about the civilization of Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. Yeah, so almost twice as that, twice as the size of that particular place, that particular civilization. And Mohenjo-daro was also expanding in the later years, okay? So dozens of small villages were deserted. What do you mean by that? Can you just recount? Because the king was forcing all the villagers to stay in close proximity. And what happened? They used to leave their villages. They left their village homes and they came and settled near the king. So because of that, many villages were deserted. Why did the king force the people to come and stay in close proximity? So that he can form his army. Okay, so there was a great population shift which happened. Significantly, Uruk also started building a defensive wall. It was like a kingdom now at a very early date, and this actually happened about 4200 BC to 400 CE, and by about 2800 BC it had expanded to 400 hectares. So look at the expansion of the city. It's not necessary for you to remember all these dates exactly, but you should know an approximate measurement. You should know the approximate period in which this happened. So defensive wall, as if they're going for a war. They were very prepared and foresighted. Now, coming to when you have a warfare, definitely you will have war captives, you will have looting, you will have plundering, you will have sharing of all the clout, the effectiveness of the war. Okay? So war captives and local people were put to work for the temple. So local people and all the people were brought from the other places which was defeated through war. They used to make all these people to work in the temple, for the temple, through the process of production or directly for the ruler. So their work was only to work. For example, the bricks. The bricks were made by these people to build the huge constructions and all that. Even the Bible, the remains of such kind of, tellings are seen in the Bible also, where the people were asked to make the bricks. This, rather than agricultural tax, was compulsory. So more than the tax that they paid, even then they had tax, not like how we have it today, but they used to give tax in the form of goods. And it was more compulsory than the tax where you have to pay for the ruler. And those who actually worked were paid rations. That is, they will have a list of things that will be given to the people, just like that, free. Okay? And hundreds of ration lists have been found. That is how they began to decipher. They deciphered that ration was there during the Mesopotamian ages because of the ration tablets that they saw. People had the account and documents of how many people were given ration. So ration lists were found against people's names, the quantities of grain, cloth or oil allotted to them. So it was allotted to them. Maybe it's cloth, oil, the basic necessities. So for that the people worked. So that is a ration list, and that is how documentation was actually done over time. Okay, so that is how things were done. And the next thing is, it was estimated that one of the temples took almost 1,500 men working 10 hours a day. So look at the working slot. It was not like today where you could really complain. It was not like that. And it almost took these many men to work 10 hours a day and 5 years to build. Remember that we never had any equipment as the crane or the cement or all these kind of things. They had to make everything, and that is how they built the temples. And they were just interested in the temples. And rulers were consistently demanding and commanding the people to fetch stones or metal. Suppose a stone and metal is not found, they will ask, go and fetch it from the nearby place. It was like that. The metal ores, they will have to dig it up, and it was really hard work. And they help them to make bricks, lay the bricks for a temple. It was a huge process. And sometimes they were asked to go to a distant country to fetch suitable materials. And there were also technical advances at Uruk around 3000 BC. What is this technical advance? Technologically also they had some kind of advances. What was that? Apart from bricks, bronze tools came into use for various crafts. Discovery of bronze. They started using it. And architects slowly started to construct brick columns because there was no suitable wood to bear the weight of the roof of large halls. They wanted the temples to be magnificent. It is not simple room. Of course, we saw in the previous slide that everything started with a basic house size. Okay, they built temples initially in the size of a house, a small house which was used by the people to live in. Okay, a small house for the god. It was like that. That's how they started initially. But slowly it progressed and they got interested in magnificent temples. It became so big and people were so particular about the brick columns. They started constructing brick columns. And that was because of necessity again, because no suitable wood was there to bear the weight of the huge and large halls. So bronze was very important. Now mosaic. The invention of mosaic. Can you see the work over here? Colorful and attractive. So hundreds of people were working to make and bake clay. Clay is something to which they were so used to from the beginning of the times of Mesopotamia, baking clay cones, and it was actually pushed into the temple walls, very familiar. And then they used to paint in different colors, creating a colorful mosaic. So look at the mosaic. They used to paint it with different colors and it looked very attractive. So the sense of color was there from then itself. Then in sculpture, we saw many sculptures. There were superb achievements, not only in easily available clay, but in imported stone. What do you mean by importing? Don't compare it with the importing that you have now. Of course, they got things from other lands. So that is how they made sculptures. So there was a kind of competition on whose temple looked magnificent. Yes, definitely. And then there was a technological landmark, that is the potter's clay. Potter's clay for earthenwares and all those kind of things. And when people actually got together, even in the caves, we saw the early man cave. Man started using the potter's wheel, and the initial wheel also we saw. So, in the long run, instead of one or two people sitting at the potter's wheel, they had a small potter's workshop. That is how it expanded. People used to sit in community and make things, and they used to sell it, like similar pots at the same time, and then they traded it for wealth. Now, life in the city. What was actually the life in the city? Now, we saw that there were rulers, there was warfare, people started growing, expanding, there was levels of people also, the king was there, chief was there, local people were there, and captives were there, even soldiers, right? So what we have seen is that a ruling elite had emerged. A small section of society had a major share of the wealth. So major share of the wealth went to a small section. Again, problems are going to come. Now, nothing can actually match the fact that it had so much of wealth, jewelry, gold vessels, wooden musical instruments inlaid with white shell, and lapis-lazuli, ceremonial daggers of gold, etc. So these were dug from the Mesopotamian sites, and it was buried with some kings and queens at Ur. Ur is a different place, okay? So all these things, the wealth was actually buried with kings and queens. What about the ordinary people? This is the status of the wealthy people or the aristocratic people, as you can say, alright? Now what about the ordinary people? We know from the legal text, that is from the Mesopotamian dugout text, that there were a lot of disputes, inheritance matters like how we have now. Everything was there even in Mesopotamia. And people used to live in nuclear family where you have the mother, father and the children. That was the norm. Now, even though a married son and his family often resided with his parents, they were more comfortable with the nuclear families and not a joint family. So even if the son got married, It meant that he will have to go and live in a separate place. The father was the head of the family, and we know a little about the procedures for marriage. So marriage, what happened? Interesting part. A declaration was made about the willingness to marry. Okay, they were asked whether you are really willing to marry, not the women. The bride's parents giving their consent to the marriage. Of course, it was dependent on the parents' decisions. Then a gift was given by the groom's people, that is the boy's people or the relatives to the bride's people. A gift was given from the boy's side to the girl. When the wedding took place, gifts were exchanged by both parties, and they ate together, they made merry, and lot of offerings was made in the temple. Very similar to what we have today, right? And when the mother-in-law came to fetch her, the bride was given her share of the inheritance by her father. So immediately the inheritance will have to be settled by the father from the bride's side. And the father's house, suppose the girl is having a lot of brothers, the father's house with the livestock, herd, fields, etc. were inherited by the sons and not by the daughter. Now, Ur, the city of Ur, can you see it here? Very beautiful. Okay. Let us take a look at Ur, one of the earlier cities to have been excavated. It was also excavated. Ur was a town whose ordinary houses were systematically excavated in the 1930s. So you have to be very careful when you excavate a place, and ordinary houses were excavated, and that is how they studied about the life of the ordinary people. Let's start with the first point. Narrow winding streets were found, and it was very difficult to have wheeled carts go into those narrow streets. Okay. It wouldn't have reached many houses because it was so narrow. Alright. And sacks of grain and firewood would have arrived on donkey back. They used animals and not carts. Though cart was invented, they used animals because the streets were really winding and it was so narrow. Narrow winding streets and the irregular shapes of house plots also indicate an absence on town planning. So we can see that the streets are winding and irregular shapes of the houses, the plots and everything, because architecture was not there and people just built the way they liked it. So planning was very less. That's what we can learn from the style and architecture of the buildings. And one thing is, there were no street drainage system, okay, of the kind we find in contemporary Mohenjo-daro. Mohenjo-daro was more civilized and there was no street drainage system. So what did the people do? Drains and clay pipes were instead found in the inner courtyards of the Ur houses. Okay, it was found. It's not that they did not use, but it is thought that house roofs sloped inwards and rainwater was channeled via the drain pipes into sumps. They did not have the sanitation tanks, or we can say septic tanks and all these kind of things. So the houses sloped inwards and all the rainwater was collected. It was channeled towards sump. What is a sump? It is a kind of huge basin which is used to collect the water, the trash and the sewage. Instead of the septic tank, they had the sumps which collected all this rubbish and the sewage in the inner courtyard itself. It was within the house itself that everything was connected, and maybe it just went into the ground. So the inner courtyards give evidence of all these kind of things, the drains, clay pipes, and then they found out that the houses were roofing or sloping inwards, where everything was collected in huge basins which collected the rubbish. Now, this would have been a way of preventing the unpaved streets. Now, why did they have everything into the house? Maybe we'll be thinking that way now, because the streets were very narrow. And what happens after the rainfall? After the rainfall, if they're going to allow all the rubbish to go into the street, it will be slushy, it will be more dirty, and hardly place for them to walk. Only donkeys could walk. Yet people seem to have swept all their household refuse. So in spite of all these facilities, people used to constantly sweep everything into their street. It could be found in the street because they cannot keep everything into their inner courtyard. It will start smelling, it will start stinking. So they used to rub it and they used to just throw it into the streets, which really went trodden underfoot. Very unhygienic, right? And this made street level rise with a lot of rubbish. And over time, what did people do? They started raising the platform of their thresholds. That is, when you have the doors made, you have a threshold where you keep the foot and then you enter the house, right? That is threshold. So they started raising the level of the threshold. Earlier, the houses never had thresholds. So to keep away all these kind of things, they started raising the level and platform of the threshold of houses. It had to be raised so that no mud would flow inside after the rain. So after the rain, it was really difficult to keep the rubbish away. So that's why they did this particular thing, to raise the threshold.